Peter Sohn, and I am 46 years old, and I was born in New York, in the city of the Bronx. My parents met there in the Bronx, and so my father came from Miryang in South Korea in the late 60s, early 70s. It was like either 1969 or 1971. And he came out here to start a new life. And he is a product of the Korean War. Both my parents had a childhood of tough times. But as my sort of father was trying to figure out his life in Korea, he had a business that didn't do too well, and he came out to the United States, to New York, to start a business from scratch. Meanwhile, my mother, who came in maybe 1971 or 72, came through nursing, and so she had started in South Korea, going to nursing school, and through the American military, I think there was a program that allowed her to transfer to a Chicago hospital, and she went with some of her sort of student friends, and a couple months in Chicago, she found a connection to New York, and my father and mother would soon meet after that. Yeah, there weren't a lot of Koreans in New York in the late 60s, or at least that's how my father told me, or what my father told me. And that jump is so huge in our family's story because he was the first one to make this leap and this decision to leave. His first store that he started was on 241st Street in the Bronx. It's where like the second line ends. It's like literally right there. What I love about it is that it was a blank store, and he made everything himself. And so it still exists. And all the shelves are made with like broomstick like handle. Like it's so like janky, but it was made with nothing. And that's where he would meet my mom. I would be born soon after he started the store, and he ran it for at least 8 years there before he saved enough money with that to buy a bigger spot in New Rochelle that he would name 777 Food Mart, based off of the year that I was born, 1977. So from there, it would be that grocery store. Then he would save enough money to buy the next building next to it, and then the building after that. The life growing up in the supermarkets had a great effect on me because of how hard both my father and mother worked. The art supply shop didn't come until I was in high school. We would go to Woodside and Queens to go to this SAT school every Saturday and every summer since I was in the 4th grade, because my uncle owned it. And that gave us free tuition. And so that means, because my parents worked so hard, if we weren't at the store, we were at this SAT school. And my parents were so frustrated with me because I would draw on every one of these tests. And my mom would reprimand me very hard about drawing and needing to get my grades up. The irony that I didn't know growing up was how much that she also wanted this future of being in the arts, and that she would just say, because of her upbringing, that it's just not a future, She'd break pencils, she'd throw away comics or art books that I had. It was never going to be a future. And because my mother and I, our personalities are so similar, our short tempers would just like flare instantly if she said no to anything. And I fought her a great deal on that. My father, on the other hand, was more practical about it. He didn't understand it. He said no for a while until a customer came into my father's art supply shop that was looking for art supplies, and he turned out to be an animator or worked in animation in New Rochelle somewhere. And when my father had found this out, knowing that I wanted to get into this business when I was like, I don't know, 7th or 8th grade, he asked him full on Asian style, like, how much money do you make? And how hard is it? Then once he found out all this information, he flipped on a dime. The practicality of what a career could be in that allowed him to say, you should go for this. Where my mother was like, you're not leaving here. You're going to run this thing. And so that ironically, the art supply store, not because of the art itself, but because of a customer, opened a door in my father in a very practical way, that he would help me navigate my mother in terms of how to find the right job in that. But that's a source of something that I would fight with my mother for the rest of our lives together, honestly. The flip side of that was that we shared a lot of passions outside of the art. When we were kids, she took us to the movies all the time. When she was a kid, her father was the electrician of the town, and so she got access to the movies all the time. She would draw the movie posters, but she just loved the films. And so we could talk about more complicated things that the movies would be able to communicate that allowed us to fill some of our gaps. And even though our communication was broken a lot of the times and we'd fight over that, there were so many other parts that like connected us together in terms of, musicals or a comedy movie or a love story where we would share tears together. When she was doing laundry, she would ask me to play Fiddler on the Roof on the clarinet for her, even though it's not that we were communicating about it. And as funny as that sounds, the song that she would ask me to play for her would be connected to that movie with one of the daughters having to leave home. And it was like Far From the Home I Love. As a kid, when I'm playing it for her, like I didn't understand why she wanted me to play this. But then the older I got, the more I understood, like, yeah, this is her sort of connection to her home, what she misses, even though it's told through this Jewish lens. That's something that became a piece of a puzzle that, you wouldn't literally talk about, but you would sing it with each other. But that part of it grew that love of that type of art form of communicating through images and sound, and that clearly had an effect on me. That movies could affect her so much, but then her day-to-day sort of world of cashier, counting money, our dinner table, then there was this escapist thing that I feel like as immigrants, what movies do to help people assimilate or acculturate is not talked about enough. It's such a big thing. Getting into animation was all that I wanted. It was a very obsessive, very sort of focused sort of way of being. Like I was just trying to learn everything that I could about it, making films and trying to, make little drawings come to life. That in it of itself was sort of liberating, like just the act of creating art or making characters had its own liberation. And the only thing that I remember was, my mom softening to this idea, but there wasn't like finally. I mean, leaving New York for the first time was incredibly scary, trying to get out into the industry out here. I don't know if there was like a big moment to say. I feel like maybe getting into art school in LA allowed a first step toward what that reality might be. Maybe it's because I always knew that if all this failed, I could go back to the store. And so there wasn't that sort of like, my parents had created some kind of net. And so I don't know if I ever felt liberated from that. It was maybe like, I don't need to be liberated. It's a safety net. Like I can always come back, maybe was the thing that allowed me to just go like whole hog into, drawing. In a lot of the communities that I started working with, so much of the creative job was really about bringing a part of yourself. It wasn't as delineated. And so in a world of best idea wins and hunting for truth, everyone would be offering either jokes of experiences that they had or emotional moments they've had growing up. And I really clearly came from a lens of a Korean American upbringing or immigrant background. And so a lot of the stories I would tell come from that lens. And so when I got into a more sort of supervisor sort of roles, did, the idea of what my identity was and how that connected to work sort of became a little clearer for me. When my parents passed away, it was tied to work that I was doing, like creative work, to a film that I was making. And so it was such a weird experience to share my parents' stories with coworkers, because the film was, you know, about immigrants, but it was started when they were both alive. But then as we were building the story, they would both pass away separately during the time. But as in terms of trying to grieve and close the door on my parents, I couldn't, because this film sort of had pieces of them that you were still having to talk about. And so there were very clear ideas of what pieces of them were left in me because I was talking about it a lot with folks. Now that the film was done and now that it's sort of like in the rearview mirror, I feel like I can have a more separate experience with their death that's not just colored in making something about them, you know, or honoring them in that way. And it really now just becomes about a gratefulness of these pieces that are left in my brother and I that clearly have come from my parents, of who they were, you know, as people, and also of the heritage and the country that they come from. And it's a minefield of wonderful, of day-to-day explosions of connections to my parents, in terms of like my son was trying to get rid of a bug, and all of a sudden that action of him trying to catch this thing brought me to a story of my mom, of her growing up in post-Korean War where they had no food and she was just chasing after grasshoppers, where I would like just flash this and I would tell my son, like, you know what you're reminding me of right now is a story that mom would say. So there were these things that, you know, through your day-to-day life that you're able to keep of your parents, not just their Koreanness, just who they were. Recently, this summer, I took my kids to Korea for the first time, and they had never gone. I went with my brother and his kids, and this was after both my parents or their grandparents had passed away. So that link to our culture sort of got severed. But through my brother and his wife, who was born and raised in Korea, do we have this new lens to sort of understand these pieces of modern Korea that we never really got from our parents. And that experience this summer was really, really fun to enjoy, seeing, you know, through my kids' eyes. You know, like there's an effect when you have kids, when you've seen a movie your whole life, but then when you show your kids that movie, it's almost like you're seeing the movie for the first time again, because you're seeing it through their lens of their reaction of like, oh, it's all new to them. It was the same for this culture in this weird analogy of like, of them seeing like an old ajama wrapping up kimbap really fast. Like you grow up watching that a lot when you're a kid, but seeing my kids like amazed by this made me even more amazed at all of it too. And they're going to have their own journey in understanding their 50% of their Koreanness and these other pieces of them. But the pride as a father of the times when they learn to insa or to learning a bit of the language has just been this like lifelong thing that's been great. I think the interesting thing for me is I left New York and all of my family is still there, most everybody. Some cousins have come out to California but then have moved back. That idea of leaving and having to form a family out here is something that I love, but something that I regret, that I don't have that everyday or weekend connection with cousins and family as much as I do. And now that I've lost my parents, there is a different sort of loneliness that now happens, that because I'm so far away from physical family, you know, or blood-related family. And, you know, there is a yearning to keep that love alive. This sort of weird sort of disconnect and loneliness that I feel now that my parents are gone and being 3,000 miles away from my family, I kind of understand in a deeper way what that must have been like for my parents to have left everything that they knew and not have enough money to even fly back. That weird world of having to build a family that becomes your heritage in some weird way. I feel like, if anything, that I want my family to know on the East Coast how much I miss them and miss that part of the heritage, and that generation is slowly going to go away even further, and how important it is to stay connected with each other. Like, what a guyokgebe is, or what a memorial is, where the families come together. They become far and fewer between when you're so far away. And I don't know if the message is of regret. It's more of how much I love and miss everyone. But the dream future would be, having the family having my family inundated with my larger Korean side of the family. Like, when my kids came back from Korea, I was like, "What did you think of the tteokbokki? What did you think of all that stuff?" They were like, "That's all great. I just miss the cousins," and that's the thing that you're like, right. Their family is the most important thing. Yeah, whatever I can do to get that to be the future, I'm going to do. My name is Peter Sohn, and this is my Korean American story.